Good morning, everybody. Just a quick recap, and I'll get to Steve in a minute. I just want to start off by talking about Hildean's mission, which is values into action. Sort of straight from Lincoln, as you can imagine, values into action. Our core values, also emanating straight from Lincoln: integrity, perseverance, and civic responsibility. Along with if we have the values into action, the key actions are historic preservation, land conservation, sustainability, and civil civic discourse. All of those really coming straight from the notion of civic responsibility. Today's program is the second in a series that started 2 weeks ago. And this series, the whole series relates really to two of our key actions of land conservation and sustainability. 2 weeks from today, before I get to today's speaker, 2 weeks from today we have Alan Calfee talking about the forested landscape, which connects to everything you will have heard before, although it will certainly stand on its own, with geology and Steve Revell's talk about hydrogeology. And Alan will talk about why we have the forest we have, where it came from both historically, how it relates to the soils, water, etc., and also, of course, the impact of mankind on the forest. And 2 weeks later, Andrea Lucchini, our own Andrea Lucchini, will talk about really following up with the same theme, and we'll talk about the soils that we have in the Battenkill Valley, where they came from, why we have them, how we can protect them, what they are particularly good at growing, and those kinds of things. So what's really happening at Hildene, and consistent with this series, is that we're working to bring our entire 412 acres to life. We have a trail system that runs across the property, 12 miles of trail that we work really hard to maintain year-round. So it is a place, when you have the urge to do it, just to put on the right kind of footwear and come and spend the day outside. There's wonderful terrain. It's some of the most beautiful property in the world, frankly. At the Dean Farm, one of the things we're also trying to do is, Hildene, as we all know, is at two levels: the level at which we're sitting now, and then the level 300 feet below, which is the other half of the property. We might think of it historically as being called the Meadows, but it's now been sort of renamed the Dean Farm as we bring it back to the agricultural resource that it always was. And at the Dean Farm, animals, we have a magnificent greenhouse that's just been completed and open. We will have pollinator pathways, and that's one of the themes around Hildene is pollinators. And they're actually at the highest level of our forest management plan is protection and enhancement of pollinators, and everything we're doing sort of works under that within the umbrella of sustainability. And the next phase, also connected to the Dean Farm, is a deeply integrated high school program where we have high school kids here every day of the week, every school day of the week, involved in everything from plant and soil science to ecology, to economics, to animal husbandry, everything that you can think of that would happen at a farm. And that program is just getting off the ground now, and it is underway, but it'll be at a much higher level starting next fall. So membership, for those of you who are members, which I think it's a lot of people here, entitles you to access to Hildene the 360 days a year that we're open, so we hope people will take advantage of that. This is not to make a campaign pitch, but at the back of the room there's a box with the case statement for a capital campaign. We bring it up not because we bring it up just because it really helps people understand what's going on here and where we're headed. So if you'd like to take one of those on your way out and just understand, we hope you'll do that. Before I move on to introducing Steve, I want to thank Stephanie, who does all the work for these every time and really makes this happen. I just stand up and do the introduction after Stephanie has done all the work. And I really want to, as an organization, and I think as an entire community, thank GNAT for coming to film not just this. It's wonderful that they're here, and it's wonderful they're filming this, but thank GNAT for all of the things they do, all of the programs like this. They record and make available to people throughout the region that they serve. It really is the Greater North Shire Access Television. So thank you so much to GNAT for doing that. So on to Stephen Revell. Stephen Revell is president of Lincoln Applied Geology in Lincoln, Vermont. He has a BA from Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and a Master of Science from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois. He has an extensive background in geologic work dating back to 1971. Since 1984, he has had his own company, Lincoln Applied Geology. I've known Steve for something like 30 years, having worked closely with him several times during my law career when I would bring Steve in as an expert witness. I thought of Steve for this series, in fact, because I recall his testimony in the Act 250 case we did together 20 years ago. But I remember vividly his description about the karst topography of the tectonics and what that does and how that impacts water flow. I found it fascinating at the time, so I think you'll find it fascinating today. He describes, I asked him on the way in today, how does he describe his work? And he said, basically it's helping people with issues relating to soil, rock, and water. He is employed by individuals, businesses, government, and nonprofit organizations. He frequently serves as an expert witness in Act 250 or environmental court cases. He's respected throughout Vermont for his professionalism, his knowledge, and his integrity. We heard Dave Curtis last week talk about the history of the Earth's geology in 40 minutes, which is kind of wonderful. 4 billion years, however much it was in 40 minutes. He actually made it work. And just as Dave brought his global starting point down to the Battenkill Valley, Steve will start off with the big picture and work his way down to that which is around us every day. Steve's going to talk for something like 35 or 40 minutes, leaving 20 minutes or so for questions and answers afterwards. And I think it's just worth noting that Steve is volunteering his time here today. We're lucky to have him, and thank you for being here.
As Seth indicated, I've spent a lot of time with him in the past. Just like I've spent some time in the past with a few people in this room from Dorset. I did a lot of work in Dorset, more or less educational, shedding light on the system at hand, and taking a look at potential influence of man on very important features in our natural landscape. I read the landscape every day of my life. It's part of what I do. But I'm enamored with trying to figure out what's beneath my feet, how it got there, and oftentimes the time frame that it took. And I think this is a wonderful series. Geology, hydrogeology, and geologic process. You know, you gotta take this all and put it into 40 minutes. And as Seth and many others could tell you, I'm a talker. And I could probably spend 8 hours doing this, and I'd like to believe that nobody would be too worried about it. They'd enjoy it because I would want to put you into the middle of the process and in fact give you a sense of what's going on and how long it takes. And it's so dynamic. And believe it or not, it changes every day. But you have to have a perspective. And geologic time is a perspective that you got to think about. And I oftentimes go into schools with very young kids, and you know, it's geology. It's like, how do you put that into a framework or into a discussion with 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds? Well, you got to start out with geologic time. And you know, here we sit in our 100-year human perspective. I say 100 because it nice zeros and it rounds off nicely. You know, it could be 80 to 100 years. But I like to look at that 100 years of our time span and then talk about geologic time. And what does it mean in that? You know, you listened to Dave Curtis, I believe, about geology, and he talked about like 700 million years ago to 1 billion years ago. Whoa, that's a long time. And you look at the 100 years within that billion years with all the zeros and the 2 zeros behind the 100, and our lifetime within geologic time of 1 billion years is faster than I can snap my fingers. Now, let's go on real quick and take a look at, this is a wonderful map. This is a geologic map, bedrock map. It's in your handout. This is off the, you know, in the last 2 or 3 years, newly created geologic map of Vermont, which has a great deal of detail to it. You know, we see we're sitting in here somewhere. You can see, you know, the valley. This is the Battenkill Valley, quite literally from up here in Dorset, right down through. But the interesting thing about this area, and this is special, we're in the headwaters of 3 distinct basins, drainage basins. The Battenkill certainly, but you've also got the Meadowy River, and then you've got the Otter Creek. So this is the headwaters, the beginning of 3 major drainages that make up, you know, the western part of the state. And let's just talk briefly about right up in Dorset here, right where the spotter is what most people around here know as the Dorset Marsh. And the Dorset Marsh is one of those extra special marshes, wetlands. And you know, 20 or so years ago, we were able to get it reclassified from being a Class 2 wetland, something that we care a great deal about, but to a Class 1 wetland that we really care about. And we want to be very sensitive as it relates to it. Otter Creek, you know, Otter Creek starts up in here and obviously heads north to my county, Addison County. So we're in the headwaters. That makes this a special place. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about the Dorset Marsh, because half, I say half, I like to round things off because it's easier to talk about. The northern half of that Dorset Marsh is part of the Meadowy headwater. The southern part of that marsh is part of the Battenkill headwater. Think about that flat area of marsh, which is a landform that people like me talk about, has a particular shape, has particular features, but we've got this flat, saturated system that out in the middle of it somewhere, it flows to the north, and then on the other side of it, it flows to the south. And I can tell you, I believe this, I'm not sure it's been proven, but that divide, depending upon the local hydrology, climatology, all of this, that, and the other thing, actually migrates back and forth. It's not set in stone. It's dynamic. It moves to the south a little bit sometimes, and it moves to the north. But it's striking to me that we've got this incredible marsh, a valued wetland, and right in the middle of it, it's split by drainage process. We're here to talk about the Battenkill Valley, or drainage area. But it's hard not to bring up the Medowee, and it's hard not to talk a little bit about the Otter Creek. Now, the geology, real quick. I got to keep my eye on the clock because I can go off a little bit. I warn you. The geology, incredibly complicated, difficult. You've got up in the high parts, there's Equinox, Mount Equinox. You've got, you see that C with a strike in it and Z. Well, that's meaning very early Cambrian time period. Precambrian, we talk about that as being the absolute split. So we're right on the edge of Precambrian and Cambrian. And we're back 550, 600 million years. That's awesome just by itself. That I could open that dealie and look out to Equinox, and it's like 700 million year old rock, 600-year-old rock. Holy Moses. I mean, that's mind-boggling. But on the other hand, when we get down at a little bit lower elevations, and you can see the different, the pink, the OB, that whatever color it is, OS, that's the Shelburne Formation, Shelburne Marble. As we move to the east, we get into the Clarendon Springs Formation, we get into the Winooski, we get into the, up here we've got the Cheshire quartzite. Again, we've got a repetitive unit, the Clarendon Springs. All of these units, and that's the Bascom, OB. What's the O? Ordovician. And I got to jump to the east side, where all of a sudden the mountains rise, the Green Mountains again. And guess what? We're back to CZs and Cambrian. So we've got Cambrian, almost Precambrian here, and we've got a similar scenario over here. Now those rocks, and we can, I can go on to the legend, and the legend of the valley bottom rocks is right there. You can read it, Bascom Formation, Cutting Dolomite, Shelburne, Clarendon Springs, so on and so on and so on. If you read the description of the vast number of these, they will have associated with them the word carbonate. A carbonate, that can be limestone, that can be dolomite, and that can be marble. They're made up of calcium carbonate. The dolomite's got a little manganese or magnesium in it, makes it a little bit harder. But these are carbonate rocks. Now, if we go to the next legend, and the reason I gave you these things is so, I didn't have to keep going back and forth and all over the place, and you could kind of follow me, and then you could take them home and you could do a little geology yourself. Because I'm here to tell you how to do a little geology yourself. Because it can be a lot of fun. And if you're out on the landscape walking and observing what I call landforms, oh yeah, there's a science that relates to the study of landforms. It's called geomorphology. But it's more than the study of a particular landform, a terrace or a marsh or whatever you can come up with. But it's a study of the process that formed them. How did they get there? So again, I'm still back on geology here. Now, these are the CZs. Okay, those Precambrian, Cambrian, we're kind of on the edge of the very significant time change. If you read each of these descriptions, they don't say much about carbonates. They say a great deal about silica-based rock types. Now, silica-based rock types, if you'll notice, you look out either side of the property, you look up Equinox, you look out on the greens. What do we see? Here we are in the valley bottom. We go a certain distance to the east, we go a certain distance to the west, and we run into this valley wall that goes numbers of hundreds of feet in the air. Wow, that's a real boundary right there. Well, it's a boundary between the silicate geology and the boundary between the carbonate geology. And you've got to ask yourself, well, why is one 500 feet higher than the other? Well, that's really important to the evolution of these landforms and then ultimately the landscape. So if we keep going, well, let me go back first. The other thing that's intriguing, and you know, people, if you've ever been out west, if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, you talk about layer cake geology. I mean, it's just like a layer cake. These horizontal units that go forever, yeah, they're faulted and displaced to some degree, but nothing like you see here in the east. This is complicated geology, and what are some of the things that make it complicated? All of these things, these boundaries, contacts, especially the ones that have the little triangles on one side or the other, and you can see them all over here, and there are plenty more that are cross-cutting. In other words, they cross-cut this way or other ways. Those are faults, major faults, and Dave Curtis probably talked a little about faulting and tectonics. All that energy from the east push into the west, causing over geologic time folding and faulting and all types of shapes and sizes and landscapes and landforms. Now the other thing that's just awesome and interesting is you kind of notice that we've got, you know, Ordovician stuff up against Cambrian and Precambrian stuff. And if you go to, if you go to the cross section, first of all, does that look like a layer cake? That's why geology in Vermont is very difficult, because there's a lot of it. Now, I will point out on this cross section, this is a cross section east, generally northwest to southeast, and it's just south of that geologic map, just south of us. And the surface of the ground is right here. So they're showing you a bunch of theoretical stuff about what happened and by the way, what happened to that stuff above ground level there? It eroded. It went down the drain. But they're trying to give you a flavor in this map for the fact that we've got older formations over younger formations. How do you do that? You do that with folding and faulting. And there are many, many episodes of that. And that oftentimes sets the stage up for that type of geologic map. That formation is older than that formation. Same thing here. That formation's older than that formation. And It's interesting to understand why. Well, that's a huge topic, and it goes on and on and on. And we're not here today to go on and on with that. Dave Curtis did a bunch of it. And frankly, with these little tools that you have in your hands, you can do as much of it as you want. You know, you can be perplexed, just like I am at times. And you know what? Yeah, I got 40 years of doing this stuff, and boy, do I love solving problems. And boy, do I love showing other people what I see. It's very exciting, it's very complicated, and it's a hard tale to tell in 40 minutes. But I'm hoping to give you some appreciation for some of the things that I see and some of the processes. Now, before we go any further, think about this. The CZ's there, you know, let's just say 700 million years ago. You know, on the geologic map, they talk about it really as being about 550 to 600. Well, you know, with geologists, 100 million years here or there, it's really nothing. It's such a wild, large time scale. So, what the devil, when you start thinking about silica minerals or rock types, and then carbonate rock types, and the silica ones are much higher in elevation than the carbonate ones down here in the valley, you gotta ask yourself, why? Well, that kind of gets to the next discussion. Weathering process. We just said that all those sediments and bedrock features and whatever above land surface, they were weathered away. One way, shape, or form. Don't forget, we had glaciation. And glaciation did a huge job. The most recent glacial episode, you know, again, I'm rounding things off, but it ended 15,000 years ago. And then we had a massive meltdown and all kinds of processes that went on related to the meltout of a glacier 1,000 to a mile thick over our heads. Think about the scale here. Think about just that perspective. But then that's easy, because all you have to do is remember, here we are, 100-year people in a geologic time of, you know, it goes back to like 5 billion, Big Bang time. But I'm only taking you back to about 1 million, or about 1 billion. So there was a lot of erosion and processes and glaciation that went on between then and now. That's what took away that, all that rock above our current land surface. Glaciation, think about glaciation. You know, that was, I gotta analogize it to a big bulldozer coming down from Canada. 1,000 feet to a mile of ice, bulldozing its way down from north to south. And what did it do? It erased the land surface. It wore it down, very much like sandpaper on wood. And then, you know, it pushed a lot of material out in front of it. You'll see that material down in Pennsylvania. There's certain deposits called moraines, which mark the edge of the glacial advancement. Well, we don't have those up here because we were right in the middle of it. And we wouldn't develop moraines unless the glacier stopped for a significant period of time and then started to back off again. and then that might leave what's called a moraine. I haven't shown you the surficial geology map, mostly because there's not really time, and but there's a lot of surficial geology out there, and those landforms that I talk about most probably relate in the valley bottom, to those features and those deposits. And those deposits out in front of, when the glacier's melting away, think about it. Think about all the water that must be coming off of that thing as it's melting. Rivers carrying sediment. And if you look on either side of the valleys here, up into Dorset, right down where we are, you'll work your way out to the edge of the valleys. Of course, you got the Battenkill River, and it's got low terraces of sands and gravels that, again, as a landform, relatively level terraces that come with a stream at the base of it. And then you can keep going, and you run into the flanks of the east and west side of the valleys. That's another type of a landform. But this is all surficial geology. This is all unconsolidated, non-bedrock geology. Now, how did all that stuff erode? How did, again, we've got the, silicate minerals, the Precambrian stuff, or Cambrian, and then we've got this Ordovician stuff that's much lower in elevation. It all relates to weathering. And, I'll just give you a little teeny bit of this. The silicate-based minerals and rocks, the high peaks, they weather or break down by physical means. Sure, all rock dissolves a little teeny bit with rainwater. Water, when I took chemistry, it was referred to as the universal solvent. Think about it. It is. Well, it can very slowly dissolve and put into solution the silicate minerals, but it's incredibly slow. Those rock types break up or disintegrate by all types of actions. Some of these, no, I don't have time to go into, and some of them are very large scale that have taken place over a significant part of geologic time. But one of the important ones, frost action and crystallization, and finally, the significance of water. Frost action, crystallization, you go out and look at bedrock, and you'll see cracks, you'll see structural surfaces with particular orientations. They can be open, they can be not appearing to be very open, but water gets into those, freezes. Very unique property about water. Expands when it freezes. It pries open, the pressure and the force is staggering. And it physically goes in, freezes, and pries those units apart. And now exposes them to the action of water. And that can be surface water, rainwater, surface runoff, picking up, some of this stuff that's been plucked by frost, and then moving it down slope. Water, that's like the secondary deal. That's what enhances everything incredibly well. Now let's look at, this is silicate bedrock types up there on Equinox, on the top. So they break down that way. Now you go to the carbonates, and there's the carbonate, CaCO3. This is very basic chemistry, and you don't have to understand it. All it means is when that slightly acid rainwater falls on that rock, it in fact dissolves it. And if I had a piece of limestone right here with me and a little bottle of 10% hydrochloric acid, this is how you tell sometimes limestone from dolomite, from silica. You put a drop of acid on it and it fizzes like crazy. That's that reaction you're talking about right there. It's faster because I'm putting a strong acid on it. But that can tell me the difference between the limestone, the dolomite, and then the silicate rock types, because they don't fizz. They don't dissolve like carbonates do. Carbonates are extra special. And they're extra special to me because they're so fascinating. And when you begin to look at the carbonates and then look at the landscape where these are, you begin to see a very unique type of landscape. And that type of landscape is called karst. And there's a classical description or definition of karst. Karst is a type of terrain, landform, and its type area is somewhere in Hungary, the karst region of Hungary. I can see it in a textbook right now. I don't know much more about it than that. But here, let's look at it. Karst is defined as a terrain with distinctive characteristics of relief and drainage, arising primarily from a higher degree of rock solubility. The rocks dissolve. The carbonate ones, the silicate ones don't. You're starting to get a sense of why we're down here and the top is up there. Silicate minerals versus carbonate rocks versus carbonate rocks, arising from a higher degree of rock solubility in natural water than is found elsewhere. That's for sure. The definition stresses two main points: distinctive landforms and other surface characteristics developed on highly soluble rocks. And two, a unique type of drainage pattern resulting from the karst process. As all rocks are soluble to some extent, karst must develop only on those rocks that are particularly susceptible to solution. That's where we are. The valley bottom here. And I can take you up into Dorset and I can point at these karst features in many, many different areas. And one of the really fun things related to karst are the springs. Now, let's think about that. We've got equinox right up here. Outside those windows, we can look right up at it. I can't do that for you because we got a camera that'll get blinded by the light. But we've got that high landscape, and down here we've got a lower landscape. We've got a monster spring up there, equinox. I mean, that's like 2,000 gallons a minute, blowing right out of the side of the mountain. That's intriguing. And those springs are developing literally on the interface between the silicate rocks, those Precambrian, Cambrian rocks, and the Ordovician rocks. The soluble rocks and the not soluble rocks. And you got phenomenal recharge. You know, think about the recharge. Rain falling on the tops of the hills, entering structure, breaks in the rock, faults, this, that, and the other thing, but migrating in the direction of the carbonates, and they go from a resistant rock type to an incredibly soluble rock type. And that's where all the action is. And because of the solubility of those rocks, the carbonates, they tend to dissolve along structural surfaces, breaks, compositional planes that they were laid down in. And, you know, some of those are more permeable than others. And can you imagine the recharge process up here on Equinox that's contributing to that spring? 2,000 gallons a minute. It creates its own river. I got one up in Dorset, McNamara Spring. Awesome. Take a walk up there and see it. You know, it's off McNamara Road, and it's a town trail that walks up through there, and it's 2,000 to 3,000 gallons a minute. Coming out of the ground right then and there. Creating its own drainage, its own spring. Here's where I always sort of, when you have a group of people standing around the spring, you end up saying, where'd that all come from? Well, it came from those soluble rocks. It came from the carbonates. And it came from the structures within the carbonates that get dissolved and opened up. And the path of least resistance is a contribution to a single point in the land surface where that water emanates. Now you tell me the complete description of that. I can't. A lot of people think I got, X-ray glasses. And you know, hydrogeologists, let me just tell you about hydrogeologists. We're arm-waving fools. Mostly, we arm wave because we can't see what we're talking about. But we think we know what we're talking about. And most of the time, at least me, we do. You know, but when you talk about groundwater flow through those formations, it was always described as magical and mysterious flow paths. Because it's not the same flow as through those rocks up on top. It's a totally different flow process because of the solution or the solubility of that rock. Now let me just tell you that this karst terrain here, it's a very small scale. Here we are in Vermont, we're small. 600,000 people. Teeny state. Well, the geology is small too. This is exactly the same karst as we see when you visit the Mammoth Caves in Kentucky that you can walk in, or Carlsbad Cavern out in New Mexico. It's karst. It's just a different scale. Now, I gotta move on here because we're running out. So let's do the little kind of case study of karst. Very quickly, before I do that, I want to take you, and this won't take much longer, I'll take you to the map. Now the nice thing about this geologic map is it's got contour lines on it, along with the geology. So you can see, you know, you can get a sense of 3 dimensions, how tall things are, how low things are, what the expression of the topography looks like. So if I had to tell you generally about groundwater flow, I would say, okay, here's the high point, here's the low point, and if you want to know how the groundwater flow process is, it would be from here to there, perpendicular to those contours, generally speaking. All right? So you've got flow that way, it's kind of radial. And same thing on the other side. But when you're dealing with karst, it's not that simple because of the solubility of that rock. So let's jump ahead to Kirby Hollow. This is just a favorite subject for me. All right. I did some work on Kirby Hollow for the Dorset Citizens Responsible Growth. And because there was a housing development planned quite literally right there. And I began assembling geology and hydrogeology and springs. Well, this is Kirby Hollow. You know, Kirby Hollow is this road and right here. And I will point out right up there is a spring, a rather large one, only a couple hundred gallons a minute, called Evan de Beck Spring. And 25 or more years ago, I had a field trip that was run by DCRG, and we had about 75 people up there. And it's wild because that spring at 200 gallons a minute blows out of the side of the hill, creates its own drainage, and then 300 feet down below it, it's gone. It's swallowed up, and that's called a swallow hole. And then walking down sort of where you think that drainage might be, down another 500 feet, all of a sudden the springs resurges. Now here's the question I posed to them, the people. Is that the same water? Because I don't know. I bet it is. But karst is not that simple. If I was going to prove that, I might put a little dye in up there and come down here and see whether I see that dye again. But there's so many features here. If you look at and you get an opportunity to read that small print, what I've done is I've shown all the karst type features right in that area there. And I also show all of the springs down in this area that are used for drinking water, for all types of things, and along with drilled wells. So if I'm in a place that's swallowing up groundwater, and in places has like a barren look to it, because it's so well drained, there's no shallow groundwater system, it's just well drained. What do you think the impact of putting a bunch of 10 disposal systems in that area is? Could you predict the impact? I can't. Not enough information available. The effects of man. You know, I work with people to do developments in the right places, and then I work for people that oppose development in the wrong places. This was the wrong place, and it never happened. But this area is absolutely typical case history karst, and it's just awesome. I will show you. I mean, that little stream there, that's called Dry Brook. It's because it flows for a little bit and then it's gone. Karst. And that source is up here. I remember walking up there, gosh, it was like early spring, and I looked up on the side of the hill, and I'm telling you, there's water blowing out of 3 different locations at certainly rates a lot higher than you would normally think about, 50 to 100 gallons a minute. And that's right at that interface between the silica-based geology and the carbonate-based geology. I've told enough story here today. I'm enamored by landforms and landscape. You know, most of you, you're driving down the highway, you get to see landscape, and I hope you wonder how it got there. And they're real true reasons. But when you look at the landscape here in the Dorset, Manchester area, it's very special because it's a integration of rock types that are silica-based and rock types that are carbonate-based, and you get what we see here with the Battenkill River, the Meadowy River, the Dorset Marsh, and then on the north side, the evolution of Otter Creek. So there's a lot more to this story, and I'm probably one of those people that like you'd love to go on a field trip with to one of these areas, and I've done my share of those. This is fun in itself to point out these features and the landforms and the landscape, give you a sense of what I see and why it's there. But getting out into it is really the way to go. And maybe there's a future program that relates to doing some of that. But I would right now ask you if you have any specific general questions, and I would try to answer them.
I was wondering if you would talk about fracking at all. I don't know if that is of interest to people.
Fracking? Don't get me going. I'll say very briefly, fracking. This is an interesting subject. Yeah, now fracking. We all know about fracking because it relates to natural gas. All right, or the development of natural gas. I will tell you that almost no gas well or oil well is brought online, Texas, Oklahoma, without it being fracked. All right, that's a way, and I understand it can cause problems. Man can cause a lot of problems, but the aim of oil well fracking, not necessarily gas right now, and oil wells are vertical. So you frack a well to open up the reservoir, to create surface area. And the more surface area that you can create, the better flow you get out of that oil reservoir. The thing that's important is when you frack, you've built your well properly, not like the Blue Horizon out in the Gulf. That was a bad cement job. Bluntly, a terrible cement job. So you're trying to create surface area so the oil can flow in. Now the fracking that we all hear about now is related to natural gas development. You know, and I'm from Pennsylvania originally. I know about gas reservoirs and the Marcellus Shale and all of this. And quite literally, they're drilling, you know, 6,000 to 10,000 vertical down, hitting the Marcellus Shale, and then they're turning a right angle. I mean, I'm in awe when I hear about accomplishing this. So they drill a right angle, so they're in the Marcellus Shale in this horizontal shaft, and then once they get to wherever they want to go with this long shaft, then they frack sections of it. They're not fracking material above it, or they shouldn't be. All this should be very well geophysically controlled. They're measuring the cementing of the well down to into the formation is done properly. And then they create their frack, you know, and part of that fracking process is you frack with water, but the water's got some chemicals in it, and it's got things called propping agents in it. So you frack at these quite high pressures, and you create fractures, and then propping agents go in, and propping agents can be ball bearings or little plastic balls or walnut shells. I mean, there's an incredible number of, and they go back into those fractures and hold them open. So again, all we're doing is creating surface area. The stories that come out of this is, I think, where they haven't controlled their fracking very well. You know, where there are impacts to the potable, the clean water aquifer, up above them. So when it's done properly, when it's properly, when the wells and the process are properly done, it generally isn't a cause for concern in the shallow system. And the shallow system for me is like 0 to 1,000. But there's some bad stuff out there. And then the chemicals that oftentimes go into the frack. Because you might use 1 million or 2 gallons to do that frack. So you're pushing all that water in with chemicals and this, that, and the other thing. You stop your frack, what happens? It flows back because it's under pressure. So essentially all the water they put in, they got to take out, treat, and get rid of it. It's a mind-blowing process, and it uses a lot of water, a lot of water. I'm just going to end by telling you, this is one spectacular area. This is a wonderful area for somebody like me to have to talk about, because there's a lot to talk about, and most of you, you know, walking around the trails at Hildene, you know, doing whatever, walking up to the knob up there and going by the Equinox Spring. You can do and see and feel all of what I've been talking about. And this is a special place because of that. I can't do this in Lincoln, Vermont. Lincoln, Vermont's all Precambrian. It's ugly, dull, Precambrian rock, gray. I mean, I can make it sound pretty exciting, but not as easy as down here. This is, you know, this is a special place. I got special friends down here, and you know, it's my pleasure to do this. Totally my pleasure.